The sun rose slowly over New Delhi. It was the day of the Global Innovation Summit, and the city was buzzing with energy. The event was being hosted in a grand convention center, and leaders, innovators, and thinkers from all over the world were arriving in black cars and clean suits. Cameras clicked, lights flashed, and whispers filled the air. Inside the hall, a long red carpet led to the main stage. The room was packed. Tech giants, business leaders, politicians, and journalists sat shoulder to shoulder. This was not just another conference. This was the day India would present its future to the world. Narendra, Modi, the Prime Minister of India, had been invited to speak, and so had Sundar Pichai, the CEO of Google. It was a proud moment for India, but no one knew how quickly pride could turn into discomfort. As the host introduced the first panel, everyone clapped politely. The panel was titled Future of Digital Leadership. The moderator, a well-known tech journalist from Europe, took the stage. He looked sharp in his suit, his voice calm and confident. But behind that calm tone, something else was hiding. He began by introducing the panelists, one by one. When he came to Sundar Pichai, the room applauded warmly. And then, as he introduced Narendra Modi, something unexpected happened. The moderator smiled, but his words were sharp. And now we welcome the Prime Minister of India, Mr. Modi, a leader who once sold tea at a railway station and now leads a nation of over 1 billion people. A truly digital transformation, wouldn't you say? The room went silent. There was a strange pause. The words didn't sound like praise. They felt like mockery. The smile on the moderator's face was thin, and his tone carried something bitter. People looked at each other. Some tried to smile politely. Others shifted in their seats. It wasn't just the words, it was the way they were said. The moment felt heavy. Modi stood still, his expression calm. He didn't flinch. He walked to the stage, shook hands with the moderator, and took his seat. Sundar Pichai, sitting beside him, looked straight ahead. But something in his eyes had changed. The session began. Questions were asked. Answers were given, but the air was tense. The moment had not passed. It stayed, like a shadow. And then came the moment that would be remembered. The moderator asked Sundar Pichai a question about leadership. "You've worked with world leaders and global minds," he said. "How do you balance working with people from developed nations and others who come from more modest beginnings?" The tone was clear. Once again, it was not a genuine question. It was wrapped in arrogance. The mockery was back, this time hidden in politeness. The room waited. Everyone looked at Sundar, and he spoke. His voice was soft but firm. "I believe leadership has nothing to do with where you come from. I believe it has everything to do with where you want to take people." He paused, looked around the room, and then continued. "Some leaders come from places of power. Others come from places of struggle. I've learned the greatest lessons not from boardrooms, but from people who have faced hardship and still moved forward with grace." His eyes shifted toward Modi. "When I was a child growing up in Chennai, my mother worked hard every day, and my father traveled long hours just to give us a better life. We didn't have much, but we had hope. I see that same hope in leaders who never forget their roots." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't attack, but his words hit harder than any insult. The audience was quiet. Modi looked at Sundar and nodded slightly. It was a quiet moment, but filled with something deeper than applause. A journalist in the back slowly put down her pen. A CEO from New York leaned forward. Even the moderator blinked, unsure what to say next, and then the room clapped, not the polite kind, not the expected kind. This was real. People stood up. They clapped for Sundar. They clapped for what he had said, and maybe they clapped because someone had reminded them that dignity does not need to shout to be heard. After the session, the moderator avoided eye contact. A young entrepreneur from Mumbai whispered to her friend. Did you see how Sundar answered? That's what grace looks like. But the story didn't end there. What no one knew was that this moment would spark a series of unexpected events that would test the strength of character, challenge old beliefs, and bring two men from different worlds even closer in a bond of mutual respect. Because sometimes it takes one quiet reply to shake the world, and sometimes it's not the insult people remember, it's the silence that followed. The evening after the summit felt heavier than usual. The sunset painted the sky in orange and gold, but inside the minds of many, the events of the day played again and again, like a silent movie with no ending. Inside the guest residence near India Gate, Sundar Pichai sat alone in the quiet of his room. The soft hum of the air conditioner was the only sound. On the table in front of him was a cup of chai he hadn't touched. The window was open slightly, and the warm breeze of Delhi carried distant car horns and echoes of voices, but Sundar wasn't thinking about noise. He was thinking about silence, the silence that filled the room after his reply. He had spoken from the heart, but he knew what he said had stirred something deeper, not just in the room, but across the world. His phone had been buzzing non-stop. Messages from colleagues, old friends, even strangers from other countries had filled his inbox. But he wasn't checking them now. Instead, he picked up a small photo frame from the side table. It showed a younger Sundar, sitting beside his father in their modest home in Chennai, both smiling, both unaware that one day, one of them would lead Google, and the other would be remembered as the man who raised him with grace and patience. As he held the frame, his thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on the door. Come in, Sundar said. The door opened slowly, and Narendra Modi stepped in. His presence was quiet, respectful. He didn't bring security or assistance, just himself. I hope I'm not disturbing you, Modi said in a low voice. Sundar stood up quickly, offering him a seat. No, sir, please, you're always welcome. They sat across from each other. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Modi smiled. I wanted to thank you, he said. Sundar looked surprised. Sir, for what? Modi's voice was steady. For standing up without raising your voice. For reminding the world that words can heal or wound, but silence, when chosen wisely, carries more weight. Sundar was quiet. Modi continued. I've been mocked before, many times. People laughed at me for my past. Some still do. But I've never let it make me bitter. Today, your reply reminded me why I chose this path: to serve, to lift, not to fight back with anger. There was a pause. Sundar's voice was soft when he spoke. Sir, I didn't plan what I said. I just remembered where I came from and what you've done for this country. Modi nodded. Sometimes the best answers come from memory, not from planning. They shared a quiet smile. But outside that quiet room, things were no longer calm. The clip of the panel had gone viral on Twitter. Thousands were sharing it with the caption, True leadership is quiet and steady. On Instagram, a young artist from Bangalore had already made a sketch of Sundar and Modi standing side by side, titled, Respect Speaks Loudest. But not everyone was happy. In another part of the city, in a luxury hotel lounge, the moderator from the summit sat with a few global delegates. He stirred his drink, his face unreadable. I didn't expect that kind of reaction, he said, trying to sound casual. One of the delegates shrugged. You took a jab at a national leader in his own country. What did you expect? The moderator tried to laugh. It was a joke, but even he knew it. WASN single quotes. And now, something was shifting. The media began asking questions, not just about what was said but why it was said. Newspapers started publishing opinion pieces titled, The Hidden Arrogance Behind Polite Words and His Mocking Struggle, the New Style of Questions. One article pointed out something powerful. Leaders like Sundar Pichai and Narendra Modi do not respond with fire. They respond with light. The article ended with a sentence that struck deeply. In a world full of noise, grace is the loudest sound. Meanwhile, in a small village in Gujarat, an old tea shop owner turned on the TV and saw Modi's name trending again. He remembered a young boy who once helped him carry buckets of water to make tea. "Look at him now," the shopkeeper whispered. "They laughed at him once. Now, the world listens." And in Chennai, an old woman with tired eyes wiped a tear as she watched Sundar's words replay on the screen. That woman was Sundar's mother. She didn't care about fame. She cared about values, and today, her son had shown them to the world. Back at the guest residence, Sundar and Modi continued talking, not as a prime minister and a CEO, but as two men who had walked hard paths and still chosen to walk with dignity. Modi stood up to leave. "Sundar," he said gently, "what you did today will be remembered, not because it was loud, but because it was right." Sundar nodded, his eyes steady. "Sir, sometimes silence speaks for millions." As Modi walked out into the night, a soft breeze passed through the hallway. Something had changed in the air. Respect had found its voice, and it had spoken through kindness. But this was just the beginning, because what started as a moment was about to become a movement, and the world was watching. The next morning, New Delhi was still waking up when news channels began flashing breaking headlines. The story from the summit had not only gone viral, it had taken on a life of its own. Grace under fire. Sundar Pichai's reply wins hearts. Modi's silence and Sundar's words leadership redefined a global lesson in humility and respect in cafes, homes, classrooms, and offices. People were not just talking about what happened, they were feeling it. It wasn't about politics anymore. It wasn't about who liked whom. It was about the way someone stood up without shouting. About how a man reminded the world that power doesn't need to be loud to be strong. Social media was filled with videos and clips of the moment, but something else had started. A hashtag stand with grace. It wasn't created by a politician or a journalist. It was started by a young college girl from Lucknow named Annika. She had been watching the summit online and had felt something deep stir inside her. She posted a short video saying, "I've been laughed at for my background. I've been mocked for my accent. Today, when I saw Sundar Pichai speak, I didn't feel small. I felt proud. Thank you for showing us how to stand with grace." Her video was shared over 1 million times in 24 hours. And soon, others followed. A teacher from Kerala posted, "When my students are mocked for not speaking English perfectly, I remind them of Sundar Pichai." A shopkeeper from Patna wrote, "I used to hide the fact that I never went to school. Now, I wear it with pride. Thank you, Modi ji." "Thank you, Sundar," a woman from the US posted. "As an immigrant, I've faced the same tone, the same mockery. Today, someone answered it in a way that made me believe again." But not everyone was celebrating. In private circles, the summit organizers were worried. Sponsors began to call, questioning the moderator's remarks. Some said they would reconsider their support if such behavior continued. The moderator, once confident, was now silent. He had misread the moment. What he thought would be a clever remark had backfired badly. Meanwhile, in a simple government office in Delhi, Modi sat at his desk, reading reports. His team offered to issue a formal statement condemning the remark. He shook his head. "No need," he said calmly. "Sundar has already said what needed to be said." His words were few, but his message was clear. Sometimes the best way to lead is to not turn anger into fire, but into light. Sundar, now back in Mumbai for a tech event, was surprised when he stepped out of the car and saw people lining the streets not with banners, but with simple signs that said, "Respect is strength. Thank you, Sundar. Lead by grace." A little boy even ran up to him and handed him a small card. It read, "My teacher said I should speak like you. Soft, strong, and true." Sundar knelt down and smiled. "Do You know what makes your voice powerful? He asked the boy. The boy shook his head. When it's kind, Sundar said. Never forget that. The boy nodded. It was a moment he would never forget. That evening, Sundar was scheduled to speak at the Mumbai Innovation Forum. The hall was filled. Thousands had come, not just to hear about technology, but to see the man who had stood up with words of gold. His speech began like any other, talking about progress, digital inclusion, and innovation. But then, as his tone changed slightly, the room grew quiet. Yesterday, something happened, he said. I didn't plan to talk about it, but I will, because it reminded me why voices matter. He told the crowd about the summit, not with bitterness, not with blame, but with calm truth. It's easy to clap when someone shouts back. It's harder to respect the person who stays still and speaks gently. But those are the voices that last. Those are the voices that change the world. The crowd clapped, and then he added, I did not defend anyone. I only honored the journey. We all come from somewhere. Some from comfort, some from struggle. But it's what we do with our journey that defines who we are. Outside the hall, journalists were waiting, but Sundar left quietly, without fanfare. No big security, no crowd control. Just him, a small team, and the sound of quiet respect that followed him like a shadow. But something big was happening in small places, in schools. Teachers began telling students about the moment. In villages, elders shared stories of how they were once mocked, but had risen with dignity. In cities, young professionals wrote essays, poems, and songs about what it means to reply with respect. In offices across the country, companies began printing a new quote on their walls. Respond with light, lead with grace. It wasn't just a moment anymore. It had become a message. And as that message spread, even people who had never followed politics or technology began to listen. Because what had happened wasn't about one country. It was about every person who had ever been made to feel small. And now, they had seen that dignity doesn't need armor. Sometimes, it just needs one calm voice and one brave heart. 4 days had passed since the summit. And yet, the moment was still alive. It wasn't fading like most headlines. It was growing stronger. More people around the world had started sharing the clip, reacting not to anger, but to stillness. The power of kindness in the face of insult. In London, a radio presenter played the audio of Sundar Pichai's response on air and said, I've covered politics and tech for 20 years, but this is the kind of leadership I want my children to grow up hearing. In South Africa, a teacher printed Sundar's quote, Leadership has nothing to do with where you come from. It has everything to do with where you want to take people, and put it on her classroom door. And in Tokyo, a local newspaper ran a story titled, When Humility Spoke Louder Than Pride. But not everyone knew the full story yet. Back in Delhi, inside the Prime Minister's office, Modi was going through letters, not official documents, but handwritten letters sent by citizens. Letters from students, shopkeepers, teachers, and old freedom fighters. One letter was from a man who used to work at the same tea stall where Modi once helped as a boy. He had written, They laughed when you carried tea. Now they listen when you carry nations. Thank you for never forgetting where you came from. Modi placed that letter on his desk and closed his eyes for a moment. The memories were still fresh. The struggle, the long train rides, the dust, the silence of hunger. And yet he had never allowed that pain to become anger. Meanwhile, Sundar Pichai was preparing for his next talk at an international conference in Singapore. His team suggested skipping any mention of the summit to avoid controversy. But Sundar shook his head. Truth isn't controversial, he said. It's just not always comfortable. On the day of the talk, the hall was full again. This time, not just tech experts. There were diplomats, educators, and young people from 20 different countries, all waiting. Sundar stood on stage, not with notes or slides, but with steady eyes. "Before I begin," he said, "I want to thank those who reminded me this week that dignity is not a weakness, it is a strength." He paused, then continued, "A few days ago, I witnessed a moment that many saw. A leader was spoken to in a way that could have sparked outrage, but he chose silence, and in that silence, I saw something rare, not passivity, but power, the power to choose grace." The room went silent. We live in a time where replies are fast, but sometimes the strongest reply is a deep breath and a gentle voice. Again, no shouting, no blame, just truth. And then, something unexpected happened. After the session, a woman in a gray suit walked up to Sundar. She introduced herself as a senior diplomat from Germany. "Your words," she said softly, "reminded me of my father. He used to say, 'Speak not to defeat someone, speak to lift them.'" Sundar smiled. "Your father was wise." She nodded. "He was, but he never got to speak on stages like this, I think. Today, you spoke for people like him." Outside the conference, cameras were waiting. Sundar was asked repeatedly if he would issue a formal statement or take action against the moderator who made the mockery, but he gave the same answer each time. What needed to be said has been said, and what was meant to hurt has turned into something healing. Sometimes, that's enough. Back in India, the hashtag Stand with Grace movement was now being used in ways no one expected. In a school in Madhya Pradesh, a teacher used the story to teach children about character. If someone makes fun of your background, she told her students, don't answer with anger, answer with your truth. In a startup office in Bangalore, a banner was hung above the team space. It read, "Respect is not a reaction, it's a choice." And in a slum in Kolkata, a girl who once hid her accent now stood on a stage at a local youth event, repeating Sundar's words, word for word, her voice trembling, but proud. But the moment reached beyond India. In New York, university invited Sundar Pichai to speak on leadership. He accepted. During his talk, a student from Syria stood up and said, "I came here as a refugee. I was laughed at for my clothes, my accent, even my name. But after watching your reply, I felt less alone." Sundar walked down the stage and hugged him. It was not planned. It was not for cameras. It was just right. Meanwhile, the summit organizers quietly removed the moderator from upcoming events. No public drama, no press release, just silence. The kind that follows accountability. But something was still building. Something quiet, but powerful. Schools started a new project called Voices of Grace, where children recorded short videos talking about leaders who inspired them not because they were loud, but because they were kind. Companies began offering emotional intelligence workshops, using the summit video as an example of calm leadership. Universities began adding Sundar Summit. Clip 2 Communication Studies, teaching students the art of powerful yet peaceful replies. And people, even strangers, across continents, began greeting each other online with one simple sentence. "Thank you for speaking with grace." Because the truth was clear now. A reply can be smart, a reply can be sharp, but the best replies heal. And in that one moment, Sundar Pichai had done just that. He didn't try to win. He tried to remind, and that reminder had become a wave that was now reaching corners of the world. No one expected. Because the voice that chooses peace does not end in silence. It becomes an echo, and that echo had only just begun. The sky over Delhi was gray that morning. Soft rain fell on the rooftops. It was the kind of weather that made people slow down and think. And across the city, in classrooms, buses, offices, and small homes, people were still talking about one thing, the calm reply that had shaken the world. But what started as a reply had now grown into something else. A journalist from Mumbai published a piece titled, "The Dignity Effect." In it, she wrote, "We live in a loud world. People argue to be right, to be heard, to be seen. But Sundar Pichai chose a different path. And now, without shouting, he has made the whole world listen. The piece went viral. Universities began inviting speakers to discuss emotional courage, using Sundar's response as the opening example. Corporations quietly reviewed their training materials. Even television shows started airing discussions about the value of grace in leadership. But far from all this noise, Sundar sat in a quiet office in California. He had returned to Google headquarters 2 days ago. There were meetings, schedules, decisions, but his heart was still in India, still in that moment, and still with the people whose stories had poured into his inbox. He opened one email. It was from a young woman in Pakistan. "I am writing not about politics," she began, "but about pain. I have been mocked because of my dreams, because I dare to aim higher than what is expected of me. When I saw you speak, I felt seen. You didn't defend just one man. You defended all of us who are made to feel small." Sundar closed his eyes. The borders drawn by humans were strong. But moments like these, kindness, respect, truth, could cross any line. Meanwhile, in a small school near Varanasi, a boy named Raghav stood up during morning assembly. He was shy. He rarely spoke. But that day, he asked the principal if he could say something. The principal agreed. Raghav walked to the microphone, his hands shaking, and said, "People laugh at me because my father cleans trains. They say I can never be someone big. But my father says, your work does not decide your future. Your truth does. And last week, I saw a man say the same thing in front of the whole world." He paused, voice breaking. "I want to thank Sundar, sir, because now, I believe my truth can be strong too." The students clapped. Some teachers had tears in their eyes, and back in Delhi, Modi received a message about it. He smiled gently and said to his team, "The real stage is not the summit. It's the heart of that boy." Across India, and even outside, something strange and beautiful was happening. Parents started telling their children bedtime stories about kindness. Young professionals stood up in meetings to defend junior staff who were being ignored. On YouTube, a channel started a series called Voices of Quiet Strength, where ordinary people shared how they had responded to insults without hatred. And every time someone shared a story like that, people commented with one line, "This is the Sundar effect." But not everyone welcomed the change. A few people online mocked the movement. They said things like this is weakness dressed as wisdom, or real leaders fight back. But each time someone posted something negative, there were hundreds of replies saying, "No, this is what strength really looks like." Sundar didn't respond to the negativity. He simply continued his work. But one afternoon, his assistant walked into his office and said, "Sir, there's someone here to see you." He looked up. It wasn't on his calendar. "Who is it?" he asked. "Someone from your old neighborhood in Chennai," she said. He stood up immediately. A few minutes later, an old man with kind eyes and a tired smile entered the room. He wore a simple shirt and carried a worn-out bag. Sundar's face lit up. "Uncle," he said, walking forward. The man nodded and hugged him. "I saw you on the news," he said. "I remembered the boy who used to fix radios for neighbors. I remembered how you would sit and listen, never rush, never shout. I came all this way to say, you haven't changed." Sundar sat with him for an hour. They spoke of old times, of power cuts and school books, of borrowed bicycles and long walks. And when the old man left, Sundar stood by the door for a long time thinking. Later that day, he posted a message on his personal blog. It read, "This week I have been called many things. Calm, respectful, diplomatic. But what I truly want to be remembered as is real. Real to my past, real to my values, and real to the millions who still walk quietly toward their dreams. You are not alone, and you never were." Within hours, the post was shared across the world. Celebrities tweeted it, teachers printed it, and parents told their children, "Read this." Back in India, Modi read the blog and simply said, "When words are real, they don't need decoration." But something even more unexpected was on its way. A global news agency had nominated Sundar Pichai for the World Dignity Award, an honor given to individuals who show leadership through compassion and respect. When Sundar received the nomination letter, he didn't smile with pride. He simply whispered to himself, "This isn't just for me. This is for every person who ever chose peace instead of pride." And the nomination itself brought a new wave of attention to the story. Media outlets in Brazil, Egypt, Canada, and Japan began airing the clip again. Only now, they weren't just showing the panel, they were telling the full story. The struggle, the silence, the strength, and the calm reply that started a storm. Because when the world expects you to fight, choosing grace is the loudest surprise, and now, that surprise was becoming history. The hall in Oslo was silent. Thousands of people sat quietly in their seats, eyes fixed on the stage. The Global Dignity Summit had never seen a crowd like this before. Leaders, educators, students, and thinkers from every corner of the world had gathered not for politics, not for power, but for something much deeper. The spotlight glowed gently as the host stepped forward with a small card in her hand. She paused, looked out at the audience, and said in a steady voice, "This year's World Dignity Award goes to someone who reminded the world that strength is not shown through anger, but through calm, not through revenge, but through respect, not through volume, but through values. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Sundar Pichai." The crowd rose to its feet before he even stepped forward. Sundar walked to the stage slowly, dressed simply in a dark suit. His expression was humble. There was no pride in his smile, only quiet gratitude. As he reached the podium, the applause softened into stillness. He looked out into the sea of faces and took a breath. "Thank you," he said gently, "but this award, it does not belong to me alone. It belongs to every person who has ever been mocked for their roots. It belongs to every child who has been told their dreams are too big. And most of all, it belongs to the people who choose respect, even when disrespected." He paused, letting the words sink in. A few weeks ago, something small happened on a stage in New Delhi. A comment was made. A silence followed. And then, a choice was made, not to fight, not to shout, but to speak with truth. He continued, "That choice did not come from strength. It came from memory. From the faces of my parents, who never raised their voices. From the teachers who told me that dignity is not something you wear, it's something you carry. And from the millions of people who wake up every day and face struggle without losing their kindness." The audience sat still. No movement, no coughs, only silence. We live in a time where we are told to win, to dominate, to reply quickly, strongly, loudly. But sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is ... pause, think, and reply with grace. He smiled. And sometimes, you don't need to reply at all. Sometimes, silence speaks louder than any word. The applause returned, not rushed or explosive. It came slowly, like a wave. Deep, emotional, real. And in that room, as the sound filled the space, Sundar quietly stepped back from the podium and stood with folded hands. Across the world, millions were watching live. In India, families gathered in front of their televisions. Teachers paused their classes to let children listen. In Chennai, in a narrow lane where Sundar once walked to school, an old neighbor whispered, he didn't forget who he was. And in a dusty village outside Vadnagar, a young boy who had just finished helping his father at the tea stall looked up at the screen and said, "I want to be like him." But the moment did not end with the award. When Sundar returned to India, a week later, he was invited to meet Modi once more, this time at a quiet residence outside Delhi. No cameras, no speeches, just two men, two journeys, one shared truth. Modi welcomed Sundar with a simple embrace. "You did something that will last longer than applause," he said. Sundar replied, "Sir, I only did what felt right." They sat outside on the lawn, the evening air soft and still. Nearby, two children were playing, laughing, unaware of the importance of the men sitting just feet away. Modi looked at them and said, "They will grow up in a different world. Because of voices like yours." Sundar nodded. "And because of silence like yours." A pause, then laughter. Not political, not formal, just human. Before leaving, Modi handed Sundar a small box. Inside was a note. It read, "True leadership is not measured in followers, votes, or fame. It is measured in the courage to stay kind." Sundar held the note for a long time before placing it in his coat pocket. That night, he posted one final message on his social page. No hashtags, no photos, just words. "To anyone who has ever been laughed at, remember, you are not the joke. Your strength is not in proving them wrong. It is in continuing to be right. With kindness, with dignity, with love." People across the world shared it. But more importantly, they felt it. Schools started using the summit moment as part of emotional education. Tech companies began hosting workshops, not just on innovation, but on empathy. Even television shows wrote characters. Inspired by Sundar's reply, the movement had started with one insult, but it ended with a message that would echo through generations. Not because it was loud, but because it was right. And somewhere, in the heart of a child, a soft voice would whisper, "When they mocked him, he smiled. When they doubted him, he stood tall. And when they tried to shake him, he held still." Not because he was weak, but because he knew real strength never shouts. The world had moved forward. The summit was over. The headlines had shifted. But the moment, the quiet, powerful moment, when Sundar Pichai replied with calm and Modi stayed silent with dignity, had become something more than a news story, had become part of people's lives. In villages, cities, and even in faraway countries, people were no longer just repeating what Sundar said. They were living it, acting it out in their own way. In a crowded classroom in Pune, a student was laughed at by a few boys for wearing old shoes. The teacher, instead of scolding them, asked the whole class to watch the clip of Sundar's summit response. When it ended, the room was silent. Then the teacher said, "How we treat each other says more than how well we speak English or what clothes we wear." The next day, the same boys helped the student clean his shoes in a corporate office in Singapore. A senior manager was known for yelling during meetings. After seeing the Global Dignity Award speech, he walked into the boardroom and started the day by saying, "From now on, we lead without raising our voice." He apologized to his team and began listening more. And in a refugee camp in Greece, a young girl who barely spoke the local language stood up during a community event and said, "I saw a man on TV. He said we don't need to shout to be strong. I believe him." Stories like these spread slowly, quietly, like sunlight entering a dark room. But the most unexpected story happened in a courtroom in New York. A lawyer representing a migrant worker stood before a judge. Her client had been treated unfairly by an employer and was too afraid to speak. The lawyer began her argument by saying, "This case is not just about law. It's about dignity. And I want to remind this court of the moment when a tech leader spoke not with anger, but with truth." She quoted Sundar's line, "Leadership is not about where you come from. It's about where you want to take people." The judge ruled in favor of the migrant. Word of this reached Sundar weeks later. Through a handwritten letter from the lawyer, he read it quietly in his office and stared out the window for a long time. When his assistant asked, "Sir, is something wrong?" he replied, "No, something is very right." Meanwhile, Narendra Modi continued his work with the same calm focus. But something had changed. Wherever he went, whether it was a village school, or a meeting with world leaders, people now looked at him not just as a politician, but as a symbol of quiet strength. He had said no words during that moment at the summit, but people remembered that silence more than any speech. One day, during a community program in Gujarat, a young girl stood on stage and asked him, "Sir, why didn't you say anything when they mocked you?" Modi smiled gently. "Because sometimes," he said, "the best answer is to let someone else speak for you." And Sundar did that beautifully. The crowd clapped, not because it was expected, but because they understood. But the story found its final voice when something unexpected happened. A major global university announced that they were launching a new annual award. It would be called the Voice of Dignity Award. It would honor individuals who used their platform to uplift, not attack, to unite, not divide. In the first year, they invited Sundar and Modi to attend together. On stage, they were asked to say a few words together. Modi, looking at Sundar, nodded for him to begin. Sundar spoke first. "I never imagined one moment would carry so far, but I've learned that people are hungry not for noise, but for meaning. And when we choose grace, we give others permission to do the same." Then Modi took the microphone and said softly, "I have walked many roads, some rough, some lonely, but this path, the path of dignity, is one I will always choose again, not because it is easy, but because it is right." The crowd stood up, a standing ovation, not for fame, not for position, but for example. That night, as they flew back home, Sundar looked out the plane window. The stars blinked above the clouds. He thought of his childhood, the quiet streets of Chennai, the long walks, the feeling of not being seen. And now, here he was seen by the world. Not because he demanded it, but because he chose to be still when others would shout beside him. Modi was reading a book. He turned to Sundar and said, "Do you know what I've learned from all this?" Sundar smiled. "What?" Modi replied, "That a storm can start with silence, and still, it can clean the sky." They both smiled, and in that moment, two men from two different worlds, one from a tea stall, the other from a small home in Chennai, sat side by side, having created something together that no technology, no politics, no power could create. Alone, a movement made of stillness, a reply made of truth, and a legacy made of grace. Because in the end, the story no longer belonged to them. It belonged to every person who had ever been mocked, and chose to rise anyway.